Hey everybody, Happy New Year. Welcome to EIS Live. Fumbling and bumbling around over here with our new platform, of course, trying to get things to work. So I actually hope you can see us on the app at this point. If not, it's going to be up there as a recording later anyway. So you'll be able to check it out later if we can't see right now. We've tried several times and we're doing our best. So anyway, like I said, welcome and Happy New Year. We're so happy to be back. If you're not familiar with EIS, we are a counseling, coaching, and mentoring entity that focuses more on helping people become more of their authentic selves, more than merely kind of fixing us up or just going for some counseling and that kind of approach. We believe the only way to fully discover your why and purpose is to become your authentic self. So we help people employ a tested process that helps them move into what is essentially a new paradigm for living. It's a lifestyle change actually that brings genuine life transformation, and it's not just applying band-aids to help us get a little better at this or that. And this applies to every area of life, our relationships with ourselves, with God, significant others, marriage, business, virtually every area of life. These live broadcasts are here to present actual testimonies of people who have entered into this process and have experienced transformation as a result, and have learned how to change their life paradigm to one that keeps them in a forward movement by employing the tools and principles and disciplines that they've learned as a lifestyle. We also feature other counselors, some of our own counselors, one who will be joining us today as a co-host, authors, and other people who are working in the related fields to help us to support us in what we do. And then finally, you're invited to ask questions along the way, but they won't be able to be answered, unfortunately, but we could potentially go back, look at them later, round them up, and get back to you on some of those. So that's because of the new platform. So we're going to be working out the bugs as we go, as I mentioned. So to begin, I want to first introduce our media czar, Vanessa Rollo, but she's not going to come on screen. She's in the background and basically in still in a little bit of a sequestered time because she got COVID and she's recovering from that, but she's here to help with the technical realities of what's going on here today. Obviously, we need lots of help. She keeps our Instagram going and helps with these broadcasts and so on. So thanks, Vanessa, for always being there. And also, I'm here welcoming as our co-host today. I'll just pull you up, Anita, while we're there. We go.
Hey, everybody.
Anita is our co-host. Hi, Anita.
Hey, Bill. How are you?
I'm good. Good. Just trying to get this thing working.
It's a lot of stress.
I really don't even know if it's on over there. I don't see it up, but by
It
faith.
is. It's on. I saw it.
Okay, good.
You're rolling. Yep, you're rolling.
We're rolling.
Yeah,
So
we're
Anita and
rolling.
I have been friends, her and her husband Pepe, for about 30 years.
Yes.
And we've had lots of different interactions over those years on lots of different levels with our own children, with our marriages and church life and all kinds of pieces.
Health issues and yep.
Okay, good. I just got a message from Christiane. So it says we look good. So we're going. We're rolling.
Awesome. Yay, Christiane. Thank you.
So thanks for being here, Anita.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Val. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I hope that today will be a real eye opener for people for what the process is all about and how to get that healing. So thank you.
Sure, it will. And I will remind people that Anita is one of our AIS counselors
Yes.
now, along with her husband Pepe, who is Spanish speaking and works with Spanish speaking folks.
Yes.
So you're able to go right onto our website at ei-solutions.com. And if you need a Spanish speaking counselor, we have that on board nowadays.
Yes. Yep.
And Anita is also one of our counselors, and she's awesome. So I think, especially with women, I think you have a lot of experience as a woman over the years.
I have a lot of experience as a woman, yes, and as a broken woman at that. So I do have a lot of experience under my belt.
Yes, a lot of marital experience, children with experience with your kids, and just of course the NCCA training is fully equipped you now. So we're excited to have you with us.
Thank you, Bill. Excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, I'm equally excited to introduce our guest today. I've known Ashley Kate for several years. When I first met her, she came to us way back in the Elizabeth, New Jersey days. And like a lot of others, she came because she was kind of told to, I guess, and basically because back then it was kind of looked at as this is the thing to do, because people were telling people like, you need to go over there and get some counseling. You need to go do this. You need to go to that. And lots of people showed up. And a lot of people all thought they were all fine because they really didn't see anything wrong with their lives. And so they just kind of showed up and did the basics and just showed up. And Ashley Kate was one of those. But after a few years and getting married, having a baby, she saw that the cover was kind of blown off her make-believe life. And she was desperate for help. And she reached out to me in a genuine fashion. And I started working with her. And I'll ask her to remind us later how long that's been now, but it's been a while. So I asked her to join us today, not because she's done, not because she's graduated, not because she does the process perfectly, but because she's a woman convinced that she can do nothing on her own. That brings her to a place of a genuine life. She's applied the process to her daily life and continues to do so, and is winning as a result of that. And she's going to share some of her journey with us today. So let's greet Ashley Kate. Hey.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, Ashley Kate. Nice to see you.
I'm so happy to be here. Yes, nice to see you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Bill.
Oh, yes, of course. Thanks for taking this technical ride with us, too, and hitting all the bumps on the road coming on.
I know. It was funny because Bill's having technical issues and I'm having technical issues on my end. So we're like, it's going to be good then, right? That's what that means.
Yep. And we're looking good. I can see that. We're looking good.
Good. People are telling us that we're actually on live, so that's awesome.
Yes. Yep.
Good.
So, I want to kind of dive right in because, of course, you and I have we've talked about everything basically, but I'd like you to start so that people can kind of relate. I always kind of start this way in your growing up experience, because that's for all of us really. That's what kind of laid the groundwork for our brokenness, if you will. And of course, we don't realize that as we're growing up, and we don't necessarily realize that maybe ever. And to come to a place in life, especially as a younger person in your 20s, when you did, you realize that, wait a minute, this is not working. I'm broken and I need to do something about it. And people need to hear that story. So let's give it a start back then.
Okay. Yeah. So I grew up, my family is actually all from the South. So we moved to New York. My dad was going back to medical school. So it was just our immediate family. I have one older sister, my mom and dad, and that was the only people in New York. So we just kind of grew up that way. We didn't really have extended family around us. But I would say a big part of my childhood is I was a pastor's kid. So I had, a huge foundation when it came to going to church, and we were the typical pastor's kids with the rules around it, and I was a little rebel a little bit, but but I think that kind of shapes where this heads, because as when my parents eventually got divorced, that is really, I feel like, where I started to really struggle, because there was a huge juxtaposition of how I grew up and never thinking that would ever happen to my family. And we didn't believe in divorce, and, our family would never be split up. And so when that happened, it really rocked my foundation with my Heavenly Father and what that meant. And so not only did I start to have extreme father wounds, but I also could not understand the love that Jesus had for me at all. And I think in there too, something to note is I experienced abuse when I was 5 years old, internally. So my sister actually physically abused me when I was younger. And what I think is interesting about that is I never even acknowledged it. So when I came to Bill, that was not even on my radar of things I needed to work through. But really, that started that script of I was unworthy. I had to earn love. I had to be a people pleaser. I was addicted. I was approval addicted. But I couldn't even recognize that was an area, because typically, like a lot of people who experience some sort of trauma in the area of abuse, they think, oh, it wasn't that bad. Oh, someone had it worse than I did. And we minimize it. So I think that's important when it comes to my childhood. That really set the foundation of me chasing this idea that I had to earn love and I had to be perfect for everyone around me. And then definitely the foundation of growing up with a very strict set of religious rules and way we did life, and then watching that all kind of crumble. So it was a perfect setup. It was definitely a perfect setup to lead into that, into my teen years and adolescence and all the chaos that ensued after that.
Before we start, though, Ashley, Kate, this is like the question that everybody asks in our circle. It's sort of like, what's your sign? What's your zodiac sign? What's your temperament score?
Yes. So I am melancholy in control and inclusion, and I am supine in affection. So we were talking about this before, but the way I operated in life was I had this perfect exterior. The melancholy would have everything together. I was buttoned up. I was successful by the world's standards. And then behind closed doors, I was just a complete mess. I was a victim to everyone and everything. I didn't believe anyone loved me. I overanalyzed everything, and I just lived in bondage to trauma patterns, trauma responses, my inability to communicate, pride, really unable to take ownership of anything in my life. And I was always in a trauma bonded relationship because I believed that I needed a man to validate me. And I needed, I needed someone to come and save me. I had the Cinderella complex. That was me. I lived that. And instead, I actually traded, my Cinderella fantasy was actually just a nightmare. So
yeah, before you go all into that,
yeah, we can get into that. But
before you go into that, it's important to connect the dots, even at this point, because, like I said, most people don't realize, that when these things are there, when these things happen, and it doesn't have to be exactly your story, of course, but when there's any kind of trauma, growing up, whether it's just that my needs weren't met simply in terms of my temperament. You're a supine in affection, so that means you need a lot of love, affection, and approval. And so if you didn't receive that growing up, that alone would have been enough trauma, to cause you to have these reactions as you start to grow. And you don't necessarily connect the dots to, oh, this is trauma in my life. And you did start to develop this kind of, like you said, the Cinderella complex, like somebody's going to come rescue me. And as you tell your story, I know this is going to come out. You literally carry that into your growing up life, basically looking for that.
Yeah. Yes, 100%. I went through life. And if you want, I can kind of get into the aftermath of, divorce and go into teenage years. But, really what happened was once my parents got divorced, unfortunately, I carried, I always say that when you experience adult situations as a child, you just don't have the proper tool set. So typically it goes left. So when my parents got divorced, I actually was just very angry, and I carried my mom's anger with me of what happened. And so I almost was like her advocate, her warrior for her. And so I didn't speak to my dad for over a decade. So my parents got divorced when I was 12. And then I didn't reconnect with my dad until I was 22. And I think that's important for adolescent years because those are pivotal years. We're going to get it. Pivotal years where you need your father. Fathers are very important. And so I had no relationship with my dad. Obviously, my mom was very broken from going through a divorce and then all of a sudden coming to the realization that she had to raise two kids independently. It was a very messy divorce. And my sister and I, unfortunately, part of my story is that my sister really rejected any relationship with me. So she really wanted nothing to do with me. So all of a sudden, as a melancholy, you have a propensity to isolate. I was now on an island of my own. That's how I felt. My mom was dealing with hers. I didn't have a relationship with my dad, and I didn't have a sibling to lean on. And so I was just kind of walking through life very lost, very angry, very broken. And that started the cycle of I don't have a dad, but I can find another man to come and, rescue me and, create some sort of, stable environment. And what happened is once that happened, I started to just chase relationships. So if we're being very honest, I lost my virginity very early. I was 15 when I lost my virginity, and that kind of started a pattern of that. And once that relationship ended, I just got into a spiral of, if somebody chooses to be with me, then that means I'm worthy. So I had this unhealthy script that if someone thought I was beautiful enough and they wanted to sleep with me, then that means I'm worthy. I've now earned something. I've earned this badge. And so I would unfortunately party and not remember anything. And I was in this cycle of waking up with a new person every time. And that really started from 15 all the way until about 21 years old. Mm. And that left me so broken and so full of shame, because I always felt that I was always super broken. And I remember reading something that really resonated with that time. It said, when your actions and your morals are not in alignment, that's when you're the most unhealthy and most unhappy. And that's what was happening, because inside of me, I didn't want to be this way, but I also didn't know how to heal what was going on inside of me. And so instead of having a healthy outlet, I just drank, I partied, I did drugs, and I sought approval from different men. And that was like the cycle that I was in from a very young age. And it left me just completely destroyed, because I had no self-worth. I thought that I had to earn everyone's approval and love. And on top of that, what was happening on the surface was I also couldn't have healthy relationships with anyone, because that supine who victimizes themselves can't take ownership, and melancholy, we can play them both together, but I couldn't take ownership of anything in my life. So if you pointed out that I was doing something that hurt you, or that I did something that any human being is imperfect, that couldn't be. I couldn't handle that. So we just couldn't have a relationship. So if someone said, hey, I didn't like that you did this, I would somehow find a way to flip it around on them, and then I would cut them out of my life. And these were like my unhealthy responses to everything going on. So all of that led to, I didn't have a relationship with my dad. My relationship with my mom was very broken. She didn't know how to handle me because I was just spiraling. My sister wasn't really in the picture in terms of wanting a relationship. And so I would just find abusive relationships. And so I found myself in my first abusive relationship when I was 19 years old. And because I lacked so much self-worth, that person would actually keep me in the relationship by saying, go find somebody else, go find someone to be with. I dare you to try to find somebody better than me to be with. And, they would say, that person would say things like, it was just super unhealthy. I mean, it would be controlling the way I spoke, the way I acted. If we went out anywhere, he would say, don't speak. You're here to represent me. And you're too bubbly. You give off the wrong impression. And I'd be like, okay, I'm going to, find a way to make this work and be perfect enough for him. And then, he would say things like, he would hang up on me and say, you're not talking about anything valuable, so go read something valuable and get back to me. And what happened is I became so entrenched in this relationship of trying to shape shift into the perfect person. And I remember towards the end of that relationship, he said, he looked at me and he said, you're so quiet all the time. You have no personality. And I'm like, I was afraid to speak because every time I did, I got it wrong. But I thought that I was unworthy. So I thought, oh my goodness, he's the best thing I'm ever going to have. So you can't mess this up. He's right. And so I would just constantly keep chasing the right way to be. And obviously I was never going to get it right because it was super unhealthy and very, very controlling. And with that, I also recognized that I started to learn how to curate the perfect life. So he was very appearance based, and he would tell me, oh, don't post that on social media. That's not good for your brand. Oh, don't do this, do it. Like, it was like this whole, we have to curate a personality in the perfect life. And so that's kind of where that started, I would say. I mean, it started from the time I was young of, wanting to get people to love me. But as an adult, I became hyper aware of how everyone viewed me from that time, because I was just so entrenched in that trauma relationship that I wanted to get it right and be perfect. So
the two things that really lent themselves to that, and for the formation of that false self, which is really what was happening, and being a chameleon, one was that you're a supine and you're a people pleaser and very, very insecure. You didn't know your value at all. Those are two things that were already there, that were kind of the faulty foundation stones. And then you had your trauma underneath all of that, holding it up. So those three areas alone set you up to travel your life road that way. But you didn't know that was happening. You were just trying to be loved, basically.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And something I wanted to note too, when I was thinking about that, is with the drinking and the partying. I mean, when I say, I think people sometimes use this too flippantly, but I'm lucky to be alive, because I actually, part of all of this was I would drink and I would push boundaries because I wanted to see if someone would come save me. I wanted to see if my life was valuable enough that someone would say, you can't do this anymore. Let me take you in. And that was part of that relationship also, was once I would make mistakes, like I would embarrass myself when I would drink or I would do something, that would be held over me. Like, oh, I'm the one who takes care of you. You're an embarrassment to me, type of thing. And that just played into that shame and guilt. But I mean, when I say I partied, I don't know if there's anyone who is out there that is going through this, but I would party to the point of ending up in a ditch. And I would have random strangers carry me home. And, you know, my roommates would say, you know, some random guy, he had you over his shoulder and he just put you down last night and said he found you on X and X street. And so, you know, when I say I'm lucky to be alive and I'm lucky to be here, I really am truly so grateful, because I was just really looking for anyone to, I basically pushed all the boundaries to see if someone could come in and create some stability. And so that's why I found like the most controlling person, because that to me felt like healthy boundaries. Mm-hmm. So I didn't understand what that looked like. So control to me felt good because my life was so out of control.
Mm-hmm. But you were creating, as we've talked about, your own narrative, and building your methods of doing that for survival's sake, because we're all surviving. We're not necessarily thriving unless we're getting rid of these behavior patterns that were, you know, formed and shaped in early years. So you're basically surviving and needing to be loved and needing to be identified, and not even being able to see what actual identification was coming your way.
Right.
Like being thrown over somebody's shoulder and kind of carried off, you know.
Right.
I'm sure that wasn't in your playbook of like, yeah, this is what I would really desire for my life.
Yeah. And that's why that's why I would live this spiral in healthiness, because it would be like, I would be so embarrassed in the morning and so much shame that I would almost have to do it again to forget that I did that and hope for the best. Yeah, because like, how do you face things like that? Mm-hmm. How do you face that that's what your life is without just pretending that you're doing great? Because that's really hard to look at. It's really hard to say, wow, like we would just, and you know what part of the problem is too, is you are who you surround yourself with. And I surrounded myself with people who would laugh and think that that's okay. And when I did try to change those behavioral patterns, they would say, oh, AK, you're not as fun as you used to be, but we still love you. And, but when I was doing those things, someone was always mad at me because I was always doing something silly, like something to hurt someone, something crazy. So it just was such an unhealthy environment that I was in.
Yeah. So moving forward, and I know we've talked about everything that you're sharing today, but it's been a while ago. By the way, how long has it been since we're working together?
So we started weekly counseling January of 2021. So it's been a year almost to the day of us, really. The first time we started working together was probably about 4 years ago when I think I was 23 the first time I came to you. But like you said, it was just more so, this is something I should do. I thought I thought the temperaments were really cool. So I was all into that. But I was laughing with you the other day and saying, I would go with my now husband, Chris, and we would argue on the way there because we were just angry. And then we would leave counseling, argue on the way back about the things that we revealed in counseling, because that, we weren't really there to get help, clearly, because we were arguing about being too honest. And I can't believe you said that. I can't believe you said this. So it was a whole mess. But I would say January of last year, I was actually ready to counsel.
So I'm just was wondering, like, what was the stimulus that moved you from being in that state of what Bill calls fine to that actual desperation? Like, what was it that got you to that place?
Yes. So I got pregnant in 2020. And that terrified me because I knew how unhealthy my life was. And I understood the weight of parenting and what happens when you have a broken home, because I lived it, and it terrified me that I would create another little human being who would be so wounded and hurt that they would become me. Because so it terrified me because I always understood the weight of parenting. And so I was pregnant in 2020. I had my daughter in October of 2020. And I say this all the time now. I said, fortunately, I loved my daughter enough to do the things that I didn't love myself to do, and enough to change the things I didn't love myself enough to do. However, through the process, I learned how to love myself enough to sustain it, because I recognized that if I didn't figure out how to love myself and get myself healthy, I wouldn't continue counseling. I wouldn't keep showing up. But my daughter really changed everything, because I was unwilling to create an environment that was going to leave a lifelong negative impact on her. I know we're imperfect. I know I'm an imperfect parent, but I refused to raise her in an abusive environment and an unhealthy environment. I knew that I would never forgive myself if I was too cowardly to face hardships, fears, insecurities, and that bled onto her. And when, it ended up that 10 years from now, I was watching her struggle with an eating disorder like I did from the time I was 9 years old. Things like that. So I just was unwilling. So she really changed everything for me. And when I showed up in January to Bill, I said, if I don't radically change my life, somebody's going to end up dead or in jail. That's how bad our situation is. And I know that nobody knows that, because on the outside, it looked perfect. But it was so desperate inside the mess, that it was a very dangerous, unhealthy environment. And I needed a lot of help. And so thankfully, I always say so thankfully, that Bill saw that I was serious, because originally Bill was starting to take less clients. And so he was talking about maybe putting me with a different counselor, but he recognized that I guess I was serious, and that there was something else to this that I wasn't revealing, because I know that if he would have put me with someone else, that would have played into my script that I created, that I wasn't worthy of counseling. So I should give up trying. And this is just what my life is going to be. Because I had such extreme trust issues that it was hard enough for me to reach out for help, let alone, try to trust somebody that I didn't know. So that was the turning point. It was definitely the turning point for me. I was just unwilling to mess up her whole life. I was like, we can't do that. This is too serious. Yeah.
So in the beginning of that work, it's never a smooth road, of course. And again, just for the sake of people who are, kind of tuning in and watching and maybe even considering, getting some help or getting into the process that can help bring that life transformation. And I mentioned that to you too, is that word, those two words, life transformation, as opposed to counseling. There's an element of counseling, there's an element of mentoring, but there's an element of basically just helping you discover your genuine self, which is really the goal of all of it put together. And there were some bumps in your road along the way, and you made some mistakes and some bad choices. But, some of the elements that we try to talk about in terms of the process, like learning accountability, commitment, responsibility, accountability. These are qualities that most of us didn't have in place, before we started that. And you already mentioned you didn't have any of those. None of us really do, and maybe I don't even know what they were. These are values. I don't maybe I knew the definition of the word, but that was about it.
I didn't know the definition. I was on another planet by myself. Yeah.
No. But I remember one time, for example, and the reason again is I want people to understand, like, this process is going to be 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. Like, you had made a bad choice and you were afraid to tell me. But then you tell a little bit of a story about how that was one of those 2 steps forward, 3 steps back situations.
Yes.
You don't have to necessarily tell me details.
Yes. So yes, this process, you have to get really honest with yourself. And one of the things that I had to recognize while going through this process was that my trauma responses were an addiction. So I had to treat myself like an addict, because if I didn't put the proper accountability and safeguards in place, I would relapse. And that's what happened in the beginning. It's a process. You have to get to the first layer to get to the second and third. So you have to make some of these mistakes to understand this. So you have to have a grace with yourself. But yes, I had committed to a few things because, like I said, my situation was very dangerous. And so this wasn't just, there had to be certain measures put in place in my life to make sure that, everyone was safe and we can move forward through a process and get healing in the right way. And I unfortunately didn't understand what accountability was. And so if you're an addict and you constantly are putting whatever you're addicted to in front of you and saying, I'm just going to ignore it, but you've been doing that for 26 years of your life, it's not going to work out for you. So what happened was I would slip into allowing things to come back into my life and think that I was strong enough. I did enough work, all 2 months to handle whatever I was putting back into my life that I removed for a reason. And I would all of a sudden feel this guilt and shame because I would slip up and I would do something that wasn't congruent with the growth and the path that I wanted to go on. And I intellectually had enough understanding at this point, because we had worked through enough things to know this wasn't the right decision. But I was still stuck in that pattern of thinking, if I tell Bill, he's going to be disappointed with me. Mm-hmm. And I can't handle him thinking that I'm not the perfect student and that I disappointed him in any way. But I really had to fight that, because what that does is, if you allow the enemy to creep in and tell you that keeps you in bondage, because that was living the same life I was living before, going to counseling, pretending like I had it all together and I was doing all the right steps, and behind closed doors, I was letting things get chaotic again and slipping back into old patterns. So there was this moment where I went to counseling and I was like, I'm going to tell him a half truth. I'm going to tell him just enough so that I can get some accountability and get myself out there, but I'm not going to tell him the whole thing because that's way too embarrassing, And all of a sudden I was there and I was like, I felt so convicted. I was like, I have to tell him. So I was like, Bill, I wasn't planning on telling you this, but actually I'm doing X, Y, and Z. And if I don't tell you, then I can't get healing. So I'm just going to tell you, and I'm going to, by faith, believe that you're not going to condemn me. You're just going to help me work through it. And he did that. And that was life-changing for me, because you have to, to back up just a little bit, I lived my whole life saying I was a private person. I'm just a private person. And I thought there was some mystery to that. And it was like, cool, like I'm just private. But really, I couldn't have anyone in my life, because if you got close enough, you could see all the cracks. And so I couldn't have you anywhere close to me, because that would mess up the narrative that I had put out to the world. And now you would know I'm an imperfect human, and not just imperfect, but my life was in shambles. And that really contradicts the Cinderella narrative. And so finally, I remember coming to Bill and he was like, can you please, you need to stop saying that. You're not a private person. You have extreme trust issues. You don't trust anyone. And I was like, oh my goodness, I never realized that. I truly didn't even have that concept. I just lacked a lot of self-awareness. And so I had to build trust along the way. And the only way you can build trust is by faith, by putting yourself out there and hoping that the person that you're working with does the right thing. And this is such a great place and platform because it's full of counselors who just love you through the process and just want to see you get to freedom and love you enough to tell you the truth, but with no condemnation, with no judgment, just so that they can see you get to the other side and to a healthy place. And so you have to, yes, along the way, you're going to make mistakes. It's unrealistic to think you're never going to make a mistake. You're not going to take a step back. You do need to treat yourself like an addict with whatever you need help with in your life, because if you don't, you take this way too casually. And this has to be very intentional. And so, but by faith, you need to get back in the ring and take another swing, and get back in the ring with your counselor and say, I'm not going to fall back into these old patterns and ways. I'm not going to live in bondage anymore. By faith, I'm going to take ownership and rectify this and put more measures of accountability in place moving forward. And like Bill likes to say, we're not going to do sin management. We're going to do true accountability. So eventually he would be like, hey, it's a really big step that you keep telling me all the things you're doing after the fact, but true accountability is coming to me before you make the decision. And that was life-changing for me. I was like, got it. I was like, we could do that, but it's a journey. Again, you have to mess up, isolate, maybe do the sin management part, and then you can get to what true accountability means. So just keep fighting in the trenches and keep moving forward.
Well, that's what Julie Signorelli meant when she said process with progress allows you to love every version of yourself.
Yeah.
So that allowed you to love every version of yourself, even though you had made a mistake or failed, however you wanted to look at it. There was redemption available for you, and no condemnation. And okay, let's just keep moving forward and learn the lessons that we need to learn, so that you can continue to grow.
Yes. And actually, it was really interesting. I remember this feeling when I finally told you and I didn't lie. And I was like, I am not going to let this rule my life anymore. And what I would have done before is isolate and then probably stop counseling because I couldn't face it. And I couldn't handle it. So when I decided not to do that, I remember the self-respect that I felt for the first time. And so I was earning my own self-respect through the process and by following through on my word and by being unwilling to compromise the process and saying, no, I started this for a reason. And if I have to trade uncomfortability for true life change, I'm going to do that. And I think we need to remind ourselves that, like, what is the alternative to being uncomfortable and showing up to this process? The alternative is I get to live a life where I wanted to die. I was depressed. I was in a dangerous situation. I was unhealthy. I was isolated. I had no friends. I had no family. I remember my mom looking at me and saying, you're 26 years old and I have no idea who you are.
Wow.
She didn't know me because I didn't allow anyone to know me. You could come to me with your problems, but I surely was not going to reciprocate because what was I going to say? The truth? That was really messy. And so instead, I just isolated. So I just always remind myself that through the process when I don't want to journal about the thing, or I don't want to put that accountability in place, or whatever it is, I just remember, what am I trading that for? What does my life look like if I don't do this? And I'll trade a little uncomfortability for that, for sure.
So that brings us to those elements too of, the forgiveness aspect and getting rid of the judgments inside of your heart, taking your thoughts captive, and all those pieces. And all these things are happening kind of simultaneously. I realize that. But I think one of the parts that the fruit really started showing up was with your mom.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share a little bit about how that kind of panned out?
Yes. So my mom got a front row seat to this process because she takes care of my baby every day. So she comes into my home 5 days a week. So talk about not knowing anyone. I didn't even let people into my space. And all of a sudden I have a baby and I'm allowing my mom to come in here every day and kind of have a front row seat. That was interesting. And she watched me be in this state where she was terrified for my life. I remember her looking at me at one point and she brought me out and she said, she was trying to, in a lovingly way, say, you have a place to go. Like, you have a lifeline. You don't need to do this anymore. I'm getting emotional because I was in a very scary place. And so she had a front row seat to that type of darkness. And then she watched me keep showing up. She even watched the times where I was like, oh, I really don't want to journal about that, because she's in my space, but I would do it anyway. And I would show up to these counseling sessions, and all of a sudden she started seeing me radically change my life. Because I really mean, when I showed up in January, I said, we are going to remove everything to build a new foundation, because I have no foundation. It's on sand and everything is sinking. And so I had to build a completely new foundation. I had no idea who I was. I had no idea what I wanted out of life. I didn't know anything. And so she had a front row seat to watching that. And, even walking out the healing that I had. So my mom and I would have this cyclical pattern of blow-ups. So we were both unable to communicate. And we automatically would get very defensive and feel rejected. So I would, something would happen, and she would get emotional, and then I would get more emotional, and it would just be this all-out blow-up because there was so much unhealed trauma from childhood. And so I remember we got into this argument that was nothing, because these arguments are never anything serious. They're just, it's really the underneath that's playing. It's never the situation. It's the unhealed trauma underneath it that's coming out. And so I remember going downstairs. I'm like, she's all upset. She's like crying. I'm crying. I'm a 26-year-old woman with a baby, and I'm 6 months into this process, and I'm still doing these things, And I'm downstairs, and I'm like, we had gone on this vacation. So, and I'm like, Chris, get me a ticket. I need to leave right now. I need to go home. Like, this is what I would do. I would be like, I would just start to spiral and lose it. And I came back upstairs and I said, Mom, I recognize that my perception is not reality. So can you please explain what was happening and re-explain it to me so I can have an understanding? And I remember my mom kept saying, yeah, but that's not what was happening. That's not what. And I said, Mom, that's what I said. I said, I recognize that my perception was not reality. I was viewing this situation through a sick filter, like I've done my whole life. Because trauma will put a filter over everything every interaction that you have in every situation. You'll only view it from your perspective of all these unhealed memories and experiences, and whatever you've walked through. And so it took me 3 times saying, hey, Mom, I said that already. I said my perception is not reality. And she stopped, and it diffused the whole thing. And she goes, nobody's ever said that. She said, because I'm used to living in an environment where you constantly have to defend yourself and your character. Instead of 2 people coming and saying, hey, I'm really sorry. I saw this, and we just miscommunicated. And let's come to a better understanding. We don't have to agree, but let's understand each other, and let's move forward because we love each other. And you don't have to feel guilty, and I don't have to feel guilty. We're not bad people. We're just imperfect people with 2 different perspectives. And that's okay. And so we would have conversations like that, and slowly we stopped having those blow-ups. And now we have an incredible relationship. But I remember her saying, I'm going to get counseling. I don't have to live this way, even though I'm 54 years old. And that broke me on the inside, because for years I would say, Mom, you really, you don't have to live this way. I want you to be happy. I want you to be healthy. I could give out that advice, but I couldn't live it myself. And, but it wasn't until I got the real revelation of, I'm going to change myself, which ultimately will change your family, leads to community, and leads to world impact, right? You've ever heard someone say that? But I was so focused on changing everyone else around me that no change was really coming from, because my life didn't bear fruit. Why would anyone listen to me? So, yeah, and I was extremely codependent too. I think that's something to talk about, was breaking codependency off my life was revolutionary, because people like to say codependency is so sweet, like we're just servers and we become a victim to circumstance. But in reality, we're also trying to control everything around us and everyone into perfect submission. And I would do that. I would grip everyone so tight that they wanted nothing to do with me. So also learning how to go on a journey for myself and myself only, with no expectation that anyone else will want to come on that journey, was what actually started to translate to other people. When I let go and I let God, He could actually move in their life and mine.
And there was one other area that I don't know whether you're comfortable talking about that one area also that surfaced that you were throwing onto other people. And when they do this, that it's a problem when you realize that that's me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's a part of the addiction part as well.
Yes. Yes. So I had shared my story before about drinking, partying, ending up in really bad situations. So when I moved away from doing that, I thought that I had made it. I was like, well, I changed my whole life. I only party on occasion, and I don't go to parties. I drink with family. You know what I mean? And so, about once or twice a year, I would lose my mind when I would drink. So I felt like we had graduated because I wasn't losing my mind 4 times a week. So I would excuse that behavior and say, I don't have a problem. I just drank too much that one time. And I would excuse that behavior and put it over here. But part of that unworthiness and really chasing people's love is if you're around people who most everyone are poor communicators, and they don't want to be vulnerable and share their feelings. And I had family in my life who was like that. And what I would chase was I would want to go to a party because when everyone would drink a lot, they would actually share their feelings. And so I needed to be there because maybe they would tell me they loved me today. That's how destroyed I was on the inside. I would take all the negative that they could potentially say to hear one person say, hey, I love you, and I'm so happy you're a part of this family. And what I recognized, and then, of course, my victimizing self would wake up, because typically when people drink, yes, they may say something loving, but if we all are unable to communicate sober, you typically, if you drink too much, will maybe say some things that you were too coward to say sober, and you would get into discussions that were actually really important. They could have been constructive conversations where you grew your relationship and you came to better understanding things that hurt you. But unfortunately, we all just drank too much and then word vomited all over each other. But somehow my brain, I didn't put myself in that category. I would just say, everyone else is doing this to me, and I can't believe that. I can't believe they said that to me. I can't believe that they are too coward to say that to me sober. They're such poor communicators, and, woe is me. And all of a sudden, it was May. So I'd been on this journey with Bill long enough to be self-aware when I do self-destructive things. And I drank too much, and I basically word vomited years worth of things I was unhappy about, and I felt like someone owed me an apology for. And I was like, oh no. I woke up the next morning, I was like, I am what I'm judging. I'm the
going to say that.
Because I am too coward to communicate sober, because that means that might lead to rejection. If I actually have feelings and I actually have an opinion outside of somebody else's, they could reject me and not love me and not agree with me. So I can't have those sober. So I have to get drunk enough to have an opinion. And I was the biggest hypocrite of them all. And so I came to Bill and I said, this drinking isn't in alignment with the growth that I've had. And I recognize that I need to stop. And so I was non-committal though. I was like, I'm only going to stop drinking around these people because these people bring this out of me. You know what I mean? And like, I still was kind of living in that, And so it wasn't until a couple months later that I chose to completely get sober, because I recognized that it was a me problem and not an everyone else problem. And again, I didn't want to be even a mother who said, oh, I'm great 99% of the time, until that one time I drank and then I, did something to hurt her or did something to hurt someone around me. I didn't want to be that person. And so I just recognized that life needed to be without it. So I actually got sober 6 months ago, and that was life-changing for me, because not only do I not need to drink? Because, you know, Bill and I would talk about it and say, I was a sometimes alcoholic. That's how I would justify it. Like I was good most of the time, but I would, you know, sometimes alcoholic. But yeah, it also made me get really honest and say, you know, I used drinking as an outlet to share my feelings. I would gossip as an outlet to share my true feelings, because gossip allowed me to communicate my feelings without fear of rejection, because I'm not actually telling the person. So I had this revelation where I had thought the world was so unsafe. Everyone was unsafe around me. I had these extreme trust issues. And then I actually believed that so much and created so many walls around me that I became the unsafe person. So I was actually the unsafe person, and I was just watching mirrored behaviors. So equally of the things that I was feeling on the inside, people felt that about me, because I had so much trauma and wounds and resentment, closed in appeasements on the inside, that, you know, my emotions would just like spring out in random situations, because I had so much lurking underneath the surface. Like I would like cry at work, and I'd be like, and I would watch like my leader look at me like, this wasn't that serious, but it wasn't about that. I just had so much underneath the surface that I wasn't dealing with, that it was just popping out at unexpected moments. So I just became this unpredictable person, unpredictable emotions. I mostly held it together, but then when I didn't, it was like really, like people were like, that doesn't sit right with who she's, you know, told me she is, or what she's curated and the content she's put out. That didn't seem like it was in alignment. So it was very hard to keep those masks on as I continued on this path, and it was just all crumbling.
Well, the process, you know, you're demonstrating very well the process, and that it is a process. And you know, again, the 2 steps forward, you know, 3 steps back kind of a thing. And you said earlier too, like if you don't make those mistakes, you can't learn from them along the way, because now you have the understanding and the discernment and the ability to choose differently, basically, and realize what's actually going on, that the narrative that you had created earlier in your life was still kind of running in the background, attempting to control you. But you just kept exposing it. So we're kind of running short on time, but I did want to bring that out, that reality, as well as it's a process, of course, but it's really about life transformation. These aren't just things that you learn. You know, you can't teach somebody accountability. You can teach them about accountability, for example, but you can present accountability as a concept, as an attribute that will benefit the person, and how it's going to benefit the person. They have to choose to adopt that for themselves, for example. So that's what life transformation starts to look like, is that I can be transformed by the renewing of my mind as I start to adopt new belief systems that go beyond just believing them, but actually acting upon them and making them a regular part of my life, essentially. And that's why I wanted you to come on. And then again, like I introduced you, it's not because you're totally done and finished with the process, but you're somebody who has made perpetual decisions over and over again that, you know, this doesn't fit with where I'm at today. And by seeing these things, you have the opportunity to make a choice and say, no, this doesn't fit where I'm headed today. And I have too much to lose. This is my genuine life now, and I want to live this life. And this is getting me where I always wanted to go, even though I didn't know where I always wanted to go. Now I do have that in my sights, and even other relationships start to come along with you on that journey, you know, which is really, really awesome. So all that to say, thanks for everything that you shared so far. But just a couple of words towards some of your peers out there, people your same age group, particularly, that might be struggling similarly in relationships. You know, everybody's a little bit different. It's like, where is it popping up in their lives? How is it popping up in their lives? This false self-reality. How are they, is there anybody else who has that Cinderella concept going on in their lives, that just think it's going to be a fairy tale existence and somebody's going to swoop them off their feet, or any other thing like that you want to give some advice? Like how would you tell somebody, like, if they said, "Hey, Ashley Kate, like I heard you share, but like, how did you really do that? How did you really step into that?" How can you answer that for them?
By the grace of God and Bill. What I will say is 2021 started off as the worst year of my life. I had to make some really hard decisions. I had to be willing to remove a lot of things from my life and readjust the way I had been living. And we're now in January of 2022, which is a year later. And the ending of 2021 was the best year of my life.
Wow.
Because I finally knew who I was. I could have an opinion. I could have a difference of opinion. I had a moral foundation and belief that I'm okay now if somebody doesn't agree with that. And I make space for them to have their own opinions, beliefs, and foundation. And I will say that doesn't come without removing. And so when I look at somebody who maybe has that Cinderella complex and is looking for someone to come save them, there's nobody that is going to come save you. When you have that mentality, you will always find the nightmare version of the Cinderella story. You'll find somebody to come, quote unquote, save you. But that person is equally trauma bound and unhealthy. I can promise you that, because a healthy person doesn't get into a relationship with an unhealthy person. You are at the level, you are in relationship in friends, in marriage, and everything. But specifically in relationships, you get into relationships at the level at which you are. And so I just implore you, if you're in that type of abusive relationship and you think, well, they're the problem, and all I have to do is get away from that man or that woman, and I can find somebody else, I can find someone I deserve better. You won't, because you never healed anything. And so you'll just trade one cage for another cage. And it may look prettier on the outside, but it's a cage. I can promise you that, because you haven't done any of the work to find somebody who's at the level at which you deserve. And I will say also that you also have to get really honest with yourself, and don't let society sell you the lie that it's not your problem. That person is the problem and you're not the problem, they are. Because I couldn't have been in a relationship if I wasn't I wasn't so unhealthy that I wanted that in my life, that I thought that was healthiness. And so I just urge you to take some time, maybe it's a cause for pause, and say, I need to get myself right first to then move forward and have anything else in my life, come into play, a relationship, anything, marriage, anything. But just remind yourself that you will trade one cage for another cage if you don't get healthy. And so you are, and you don't have to be a victim to your circumstance. You have the ability to choose something differently. And that changed my whole life when I recognized that I wasn't a victim to everyone else. I had choices and I could change my life. And just get into alignment with a healthy counselor who can help you actually get true life transformation, not just quote unquote fix a problem, because you can't fix a problem without fixing the foundation. You can put a Band-Aid on it, but it'll come off eventually. You'll need a new Band-Aid. And so just go in, just choose to become self-aware, because we all have a tendency to think it's everyone else that's the problem. But everyone else has problems. But if you work on yourself, you can make a difference in your relationships with other people and what you choose to deserve and accept out of life. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yep.
There's multi-layers.
Awesome.
Well, thanks, AK. And you're once again just a great student, and
Awesome.
now I know that won't go to your head, and it doesn't give you a false sense of security.
I need forever counseling is what I know now. I'll be working out, like you work out your salvation, I'll be working out my counseling journey forever. So,
Well, it's a good supine, everything comes in layers, of course. So we've been peeling layers back for the last year, and you've been doing a fine job of it. So thanks for sharing everything today. And
Awesome.
just want to purport this out there, put that shameless plug for the process, because the process that Ashley Kate was talking about today, of course, is outlined in the book. process that we basically use at EIS. And there's another book that really helps with these trauma issues that Ashley Kate also was talking about. Move that over a little bit there.
Yes.
Called The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes.
What's his name? Vanderkolk. I haven't fully read this one yet, but somebody recommended it highly to me. So that's another one that we can recommend for folks out there. And for next week, I don't know who it is yet. So as soon as we know who it is, we're gonna let people in on it. But also just want to welcome everybody who has subscribed to the app, because now this broadcast is broadcast exclusively to the app. So tell your friends to subscribe. This is what we call premium content. You get to see us live every week. And hopefully, if we can get it to work right, just like it used to be on Facebook, this broadcast is going to be actually posted, I think, right after we get off, so that you can go back and look at it again. So, and Anita, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed this tremendously. Ashley Kate, thank you so much for being so vulnerable.
Thank you, Anita.
Yeah, completely opposite from the face you wanted to give. You got down into the dirt. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All righty. Well, listen, I love you guys, and I look forward to
Love you
seeing
too,
everybody
Bill.
next week. Thanks, you guys, so much.
Okay, bye. Good night, Miss Ashley. Take care.
Good night.